like something out of that Twilight show about that zone.
Today I thought we could take a look at each and every reference found in The Simpsons to one of the most influential shows ever, The Twilight Zone. Or at least the ones I could find anyways. Both The Twilight Zone and The Simpsons are pop culture icons, and many of the writers for The Simpsons, especially during the earlier seasons, grew up watching the Rod Serling hosted anthology series, so it's no surprise that many of the writers would throw in references to the show or even straight up parodies. The very first full-fledged parody would take place in The Simpsons Halloween special, which would later become known as the Treehouse of Horror. In it, Bart and Lisa are telling scary stories on Halloween when Bart has his turn and tells the tale Hungry Are the Damned. It features the Simpsons enjoying a nice barbecue when they are taken aboard a spacecraft by aliens Kang and Kodos. The aliens claim they're taking the Simpsons back to their home planet for a great feast, but Lisa, suspicious of their intentions, finds a book called How to Cook Humans. The aliens blow space dust off the book, revealing they were only trying to please the Simpsons, but because of their distrusting nature, the family is kicked off the ship and a lifetime of happiness.
They're fattening us up so they can eat us!
Oh, come on, Lee.
The segment is a parody of the Twilight Zone episode To Serve Man, in which an alien race known as the Canamots come down to Earth to offer all of mankind technology that would solve energy and food issues and make war obsolete. The Canamot is subjected to a polygraph which he passes, and the planet is turned into a flourishing utopia. People start leaving with the Canamots to their distant homeworld, which they describe as paradise, and then the chilling and iconic twist of what is really happening is revealed.
The rest of the book, To Serve Man, it's a cookbook.
Hungry Are the Damned is a great parody of To Serve Man, but it was decided to change the twist ending so as not to be a one-to-one copy. The second parody would come from the following year's Halloween special. Once again, it's Halloween and the kids have eaten so much candy that they end up having horrific nightmares. Bart's nightmare takes place in a world where everyone must say happy things and think happy thoughts. Otherwise, Bart will turn them into horrific monstrosities. When Homer attempts to bash Bart in with a chair, he's turned into a jack-in-the-box. Which results in the father and son going to therapy together and taking part in father and son activities. The most horrifying part is after Homer is changed back, the father and son tell one another that they love each other. This segment is taken from the episode It's a Good Life, which features 6-year-old Anthony Fremont, a tiny little monster who's cut off his small town from the rest of civilization, and sends anyone who doesn't think good things to the cornfield where they're never seen again. During a birthday party for a neighbor Dan Hollis, Dan gets a tad bit drunk and begs for someone to take Anthony out and end their nightmare once and for all. But Anthony doesn't like his negativity and turns him into a jack-in-the-box, then sends him to the cornfield. Unlike the happier ending of Bart's nightmare, It's a Good Life ends in a much bleaker fashion.
You be dead!
My, that's real fine that you done that. That's real fine, Anthony.
The third Halloween special brings another Twilight Zone parody with Clown Without Pity. After Homer forgets to buy Bart a birthday present, he heads to a House of Evil shop, where he picks up a talking Krusty doll. Although the doll carries with it an evil curse, and when it's brought home, the Krusty doll attempts to kill Homer. Homer does anything he can to get rid of it, even throwing it into a bottomless pit, but it just keeps returning. Eventually, Marge is forced into calling Krusty Co., where a technician arrives and notices the doll was switched to evil.
I said I'm going to kill you. You, Homer Simpson!
This segment is a parody of the episode Living Doll, which is about a mother who buys her daughter a brand new doll named Talkie Tina, and the young girl's angry stepfather Eric, who is resentful of the child because he himself is unable to have his own children, so he tends to take things out on the little girl and his wife. However, Talkie Tina doesn't appreciate how he acts and begins to taunt and torment Eric, even telling him at one point that she's gonna kill him. Eric does whatever he can to rid himself of the talking doll, but it seems to be indestructible and always manages to find its way back inside the house. Living Doll is one of the better episodes during the 5th and final season, and Clown Without Pity does a great job of honoring it in its own fun way.
My name is Talkie Tina, and I'm going to kill you.
One of the most iconic Twilight Zone episodes is also one of the best Simpsons parodies. Taking place during the 4th Treehouse of Horror, Terror at 5.5 feet has Bart coming face to face with a creepy little gremlin, set out to sabotage the bus and cause the entire thing to crash. The only problem is no one believes him. Anytime he has anyone look, the gremlin is nowhere to be found. But unless he does something, everyone on the bus could die. So using some quick wits, he grabs a road flare from Martin's shorts and uses it to burn the gremlin. Yet despite all the evidence that there was in fact a gremlin attacking the bus, Bart is sent to a madhouse where he'll spend the rest of his life.
I'll be home, Bart!
Nightmare at 20,000 feet is largely identical to its parody, except it takes place on a plane instead of a bus. Robert Wilson, a man who just came out of the loony bin after a nervous breakdown, is finally flying again. However, he starts to freak out when he sees what he believes to be a man on the wing of the plane. He tries telling his wife and a stewardess about the gremlin he thinks he sees, but anytime someone looks, the gremlin is nowhere to be found. But as time goes on, the gremlin begins to pick apart the wing, so unless Robert does something, they're all going down. Robert grabs a gun from a sleeping police officer and forces the window open, shooting at the monster. Upon landing, Robert is deemed to be insane and sent back to the sanitarium. However, there was damage done to the wing, and Robert was right. Terror at 5.5 feet is a fun parody, but a little darker than the episode it's based off of, especially when the gremlin shows Bart the head of Flanders. Treehouse of Horror 4 also references another Rod Serling show, Night Gallery, and even though it's not Twilight Zone exact, it's Twilight Zone adjacent. Treehouse of Horror 6 brings us another Twilight Zone parody with Homer Cubed. Based on the episode Little Girl Lost, Homer attempts to evade his sisters-in-law by entering a portal he found behind his bookcase. He ends up in a 3-dimensional world with seemingly no way out. Townsfolk of varying professions are called in, and Professor Frink reveals to everyone that Homer may be stuck in the 3rd dimension. A mishap with a cone causes the dimension to collapse on itself, and with time running out, Bart charges in to save his father. However, it's too little too late, and Homer is forever lost. Until he winds up in our world and takes in some erotic cakes.
Did anyone see the movie Tron? No.
No. No.
No.
No. No.
No.
No. No.
No.
Yes.
The original Little Girl Lost has parents Chris and Ruth Miller wake up at nighttime to find their young daughter Tina calling for them. However, she's nowhere to be found. The sound of her voice seems to be coming from her bed, but with the young girl nowhere in sight, they call their neighbor Bill, who just so happens to be a physicist. Bill thinks she's trapped in the 4th dimension, and with time running out, Chris tries reaching for his daughter, but ends up falling inside as well.
Just hang on right tight. Come on. Get back. Hit me.
A somewhat looser parody, Homer Cubed takes the basic concept of the episode and gives it the old Simpsons spin. Next up, we have the Genesis Tub, which is a spoof of the episode The Little People. In this one, Lisa accidentally creates a race of tiny people when attempting to see if cola could dissolve a human tooth. The mini people quickly begin to evolve and see Lisa as a god. Using their newfound scientific advancements, they shrink Lisa down, bringing her into their world, where they begin to worship her. She promises to protect them from Bart, who they see as the devil, but unfortunately, they don't have the technology to reverse her shrinking. So Lisa's stuck in her tiny world, and Bart ends up using it to win first prize at the science fair.
The devil is your brother?
The Little People follows astronauts William Fletcher and Peter Craig as they repair their spaceship on an alien planet. Peter discovers a race of tiny people and begins to lose his mind thinking he's their god. He ends up threatening William, telling him to leave the planet without him. Peter starts to torment his newfound followers until another spaceship arrives with spacemen even larger than he.
That's important now. You must not anger me.
The Genesis Tub takes the basic concept of the Little People, but does its own thing with it. Still though, it's a solid take on a fun episode. Stop the World, I Want to Goof Off has Bart and Milhouse order a time-stopping stopwatch from the back of an old comic book. Once they get it, they begin to prank all of Springfield until they're eventually caught in the act. The two boys then stop time again to avoid the angry mob, but in the process break the watch, leaving everyone in a state of frozen time. Being able to do whatever they want, they start to get bored and decide to fix the broken watch themselves. 15 years later, and the watch is finally fixed, and the town is free to move again.
Huh? What's it?
Go!
In the Twilight Zone episode, A Kind of Stopwatch, you have Patrick McNulty, a very annoying man who seems to get under everyone's skin, from the receptionist where he works to the bartender at the local bar. After he loses his job for being insufferable and driving away all the bar patrons, McNulty meets a man who hands him a stopwatch, which has the ability to stop time. He tries impressing people with his new gadget, but since everyone is frozen, no one believes him. So he decides to rob the local bank and become rich, because then people may finally notice him. However, he ends up breaking the watch and begs and pleads with everyone to start moving.
He holds a 10-year record for the most meaningless words spewed out during a coffee break.
Stop the World, I Want to Goof Off is a fun enough retelling of a much sillier episode from the Twilight Zone. I've Grown a Costume on Your Face is a loose, and I mean very loose, parody of the Twilight Zone episode The Masks. The only thing that the two really have in common is the characters turning into what their costume represents. While the residents of Springfield turn into witches and soldiers, the people in the masks turn into the negative characteristics their masks represent. The Simpsons parody seems to have more in common with the Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode Halloween, where the characters are transformed into their costumes after buying them from a sketchy costume shop. But this is apparently a Twilight Zone reference, so I'm gonna add it in.
I'm turning you into your costumes.
Well, are you gonna talk about it or are you gonna do it?
Bart's comment in and of itself isn't a Twilight Zone parody, but it has a few moments that are a reference to the show. In the episode, Bart discovers a comet that seems to be heading directly for Springfield. As the comet approaches and all hope seems to be lost, the Simpsons head next door where Flanders has a shelter built and the two families wait the whole thing out. However, the rest of the townsfolk hear of the shelter and also want inside. But with Flanders being the nice guy that he is, he decides to let him in.
Oh, I kind of figured this might happen, so I built the shelter big enough for both our families.
No deal, out.
Get in the shelter, Homer.
This scene is a direct reference to the episode The Shelter from Season 3 of The Twilight Zone. In it, families and neighbors are thrown into panic when 3 unidentified objects, likely nuclear missiles, are headed straight towards the United States. Bill Stockton had a shelter made in his basement for himself and his family, but as the threat approaches, his neighbors do whatever they can to get inside. The scene also takes some inspiration from The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street and how quickly the townsfolk turn on one another in the face of something terrifying. Terror of Tiny Toon is more of a parody of the 1992 film Stay Tuned, but there's one part that could be argued as a reference to the Twilight Zone movie. In this segment, Bart and Lisa decide on staying home and watching Itchy and Scratchy instead of going out trick-or-treating. Marge doesn't want her kids watching gruesome Halloween cartoons while she's gone, so she takes the batteries to the remote with her. With no batteries, Bart and Lisa use a rod of plutonium instead and end up getting sucked inside the TV. There, the two kids are chased by Itchy and Scratchy, who try to kill them.
The Cartoon X, I love it.
In the Twilight Zone movie, there's a remake of It's a Good Life, which features a character being transported into a cartoon. Strangely enough, that character is played by Nancy Cartwright, the actress who voices Bart Simpson. So even though it hasn't been stated to be a direct reference, I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that it didn't at least give some inspiration. Back in the second Treehouse of Horror, Lisa's nightmare takes inspiration from several things, including the classic tale of the monkey's paw and the 1980s Twilight Zone segment, A Small Talent for War. While the Simpsons use the monkey paw for wealth and gluttony, Lisa uses it to achieve world peace. But this only makes things worse for the planet when aliens decide to take over now that the Earth has completely disarmed itself. Eventually, Flanders makes a wish to rid the planet of the aliens and restore things mostly back to normal.
He's got a board with a nail in it!
And save humanity, will ya?
In A Small Talent for War, the governments of the world are met by an alien who claims to have seeded all life on Earth. The alien tells them that their small talent for war has led the aliens to destroy all life in the next 24 hours unless they can change their ways. The world leaders all get together and draft up a plan for world peace. Although when the alien returns, he didn't want world peace. He wanted a great talent for war. The human race was created to be warriors, but because they failed to do so, the Earth is now doomed. Homie the Clown isn't a direct parody, but it has a joke that's taken straight out of the Twilight Zone episode, Eye of the Beholder. In Homie the Clown, Krusty the Clown has gone into great debt with the mob, so at one point in the episode, he gets plastic surgery to look different, although he really only gets a boob job. However, the removing of the bandages is taken directly from Eye of the Beholder, where a young woman goes in for plastic surgery so she can look normal, only to find out the surgery didn't work and she'll spend the rest of her life ostracized. She's also asked if she would like a mirror before the final bandages are removed. This scene also seems to be spoofed in Batman 89 when the Joker has his bandages removed and he smashes the mirror, and then that scene is spoofed in Last Exit to Springfield when Lisa gets her braces. So it's like we have a spoof of a spoof of a spoof. Strong Arms of the Maw has a Twilight Zone reference early on in the episode. Marge becomes something of an agoraphobic after having been mugged, which leads her to accidentally running over a mailman. Unable to help him, he says it's okay because he has Twilight Zone magazine to read, and then his glasses break.
Ooh, Twilight Zone magazine! Oh no, my glasses are broken!
This is a direct reference to the episode Time Enough at Last, where Henry Bemis, a man known for his love of reading, ends up being the last one alive after an atomic bomb destroys everything around him. With no one left to protest his love of reading, he now has all the time in the world, but before he can celebrate, his glasses break and now he's left with nothing.
There was all the time I needed. It's not fair.
A classic episode of The Twilight Zone and a fun little nod from The Simpsons. There's a subtle reference to the Twilight Zone episode, The Old Man in the Cave, and the Simpsons episode, The Mysterious Voyage of Our Homer. Homer makes a fool of himself at a chili cookout and ends up hurting his marriage in the process. So he goes to a lighthouse where he believes the lighthouse keeper is his true soulmate, only to find out it's powered by a computer named Earl. This is in reference to the episode The Old Man in the Cave, where the townsfolk of a post-apocalyptic future believe they are taking the advice of a wise old man that lives in a cave, when at the end it's revealed to be a computer.
Right here's your old man, is your tyrant. Kill it.
In the episode Wild Barts Can't Be Broken, the children of Springfield are given a curfew after being blamed for the school's vandalism. By the end of the episode, a vote is held and an early curfew is imposed for anyone under the age of 70, leaving all the elderly residents the only ones allowed outside to run and play. This ending is in reference to the episode Kick the Can, where the residents of an old folks' home decide that thinking old makes you old, so thinking young and acting young will make you younger. This episode was also updated for the Twilight Zone movie and was directed by Steven Spielberg. Them Robot has a brief reference to the episode I Sing the Body Electric, when Homer is nearly hit by a truck, but is saved just in the nick of time by robots that have replaced the workers at the nuclear power plant. While in the Twilight Zone episode, a young girl named Anne, who has a hard time accepting of her new robotic grandmother, is nearly hit by a truck until the robot steps in just in time and pushes the young girl out of the way. There's a brief part in Marge on the Lam that may be a reference to the episode Person or Persons Unknown, but I'll let you be the judge of that.
Don't touch my stuff!
Hey, this isn't the YMCA.
What are you doing in my bedroom?
You mean this isn't the YMCA?
The opening to Treehouse of Horror 24 has a brief shot of Rod Serling as he's being carried off by the robot from Lost in Space. And because why not, in the South Park episode Simpsons Already Did It, there's a reference to the Genesis tub from the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror, which, as we already discussed, was a spoof of the Twilight Zone episode The Little People.
The Genesis tub. Lisa loses a tooth, and the bacteria on it starts to grow and makes a little society.
Dude, the Simpsons done everything already. Who cares?
In fact, that episode was a ripoff of a Twilight Zone episode.
So there you have it. That's every reference to the Twilight Zone that I could find, either from what I already knew or from the research that I did. I'm sure there are more that I missed. I mean, the show has something like 750 episodes now, so there must be more, but I think I got all the big ones. There were a lot more references in the earlier seasons, and I think that's because the writers at the time were more familiar with the show. But as time went on and new writers came into the fold, you had people that weren't fans or never grew up with the Twilight Zone. And it's a shame because there's so much untapped potential that can make for funny gags or great Treehouse of Horror segments. But what are your favorite references or parodies in the show? Let me know down in the comments, and if I missed any, feel free to let me know just how dumb I am. Anyways, that's all for today. I hope you fine folks are having a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.
You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.